They're always telling you, don't go to the supermarket when you're hungry. But what about the tattoo parlor? I left that place with a bowl of fruit on my stomach and the Last Supper on my back. Now the sad part. I had to go to the hospital because I had an 8mm kidney stone. And they gave me this procedure that did not work. So later that night, I was at the emergency room with a 6mm fragment of kidney stone in my ureter. They gave me Vicodin and sent me home. And I was taking 2 Vicodin. Remember that this is important. 2 Vicodin until they called me and said a couple days later and said, you really probably should come in. And then they gave me this other procedure which did not really work. And it was in the hospital. And this was one of these hospitals that believes that someone should come around every hour and wake you up to make sure you're still alive. Now, if you're lying after an uncomfortable procedure, you're lying in a strange hospital bed in a strange place, and some large, burly gentleman is standing over you in the middle of the night saying your name, you will wake up. But it's not very restful. And I'm lying there thinking, they have satellites that can tell from space if you're holding a latte from Starbucks or hot chocolate from Dunkin' Donuts. Why couldn't they have a little infrared thing, a little infrared device that from 2 or 3 feet away they could just beam it at you and it would say, resting comfortably, oh my God, what a fever, or seems to have passed away. Without having to wake you up in that way. And then I was home with some powerful medications, and I've been a reader all my life. I couldn't even read. The only thing I could do was lie on the couch and watch the Korean channel. Apparently, Verizon has a Korean channel. And watch Korean movies and K-pop. So now I know that Bulgogi Rising has a new lead singer called Sushi Bazooka. And I know all the latest Korean movies, and I was so out of it that Korean movies just like, oh yeah, it made perfect sense. And then it was time to come back and have the stent removed, which they had left between my kidney and my bladder. And they took this thing out, and there was a huge fragment of kidney stone stuck to it. And then I went home, and I had such a pain that I had to take 4 Vicodin. And I had chills. My girlfriend came home from work. I was on the couch watching a Korean movie, wearing woolen socks. And this was in the middle of a heat wave. I'm wearing woolen socks and a wool hat under a blanket, shivering on the couch. So she goes to Walgreens, buys a thermometer, says, you have a temperature of 103, get in the car. Because I was toughing it out. I had 4 Vicodin, and I was toughing it out. She said, get in the car, and drove me back, where I was immediately admitted. And they gave me more powerful drugs and antibiotics. They just wheeled the cart over. It just said, antibiotics, and they just started pushing antibiotics. Next morning, there's 3 urologists standing next to me. I wake up in the bed, there's 3 urologists say, you have an incredible infection. We've got to put you on IV antibiotics. We've got to go put the stent back in. No, not the stent. Yes, we've got to put the stent back in. And I'm in the hospital for 4 nights. And after a while, I get this roommate. And he's this old guy. And I watched him, he had, I guess they put a pacemaker in. He had all these scars from bypasses, but they put a pacemaker in him. He had wires coming out of his chest. He had this little forest of wires coming out, different colored wires, like in the spy movies when they have the bomb, they say don't cut the red wire, and they get all these wires. He had these wires coming out of his chest. Now he was an old guy, he was a real character, and he had a resonant voice, but he also was hard of hearing, so he spoke loudly and incessantly. So later that night, after the nurse was over seeing everything that he needed, she came over to see if I needed anything. And I said, "Are you going to be giving him a sleeping pill?" And she said, "No, I can't do that." So I said, "Then can you give me a sleeping pill?" And she said, I don't know. And I said, I'll take melatonin, anything. So she comes back, she says, "I can give you an Ambien." And I don't know anything about Ambien except the commercials where they have these, like, this grayish yellow butterfly flying around and the people going, "Ooh." So I figure, what the hell? I've been through this incredible trauma. I'm already in the hospital. I'm in a hospital bed. I'm lying on a pad. I'm wearing, government pajamas. They're not my pajamas. So if God forbid I lose control over my bowels from having a sleeping pill, I'm already in the hospital. It's they'll have to clean me up. So I take the thing and I'm like, ooh. And the thing is, all during this thing, I've been having these incredible, first I had the shivering, then I have night sweats. So I would wake up, I had such a fever, they had ice packs around me, tried to cool me down. And one night, I woke up, and it felt like the ice pack had broken because I was soaking wet. And I got out of bed, and my pajamas were just soaking wet, so I took them off, and I'm standing in the hospital room in the middle of the night in my underwear. And for the first time, I feel kind of like my head is clear and it's quiet. And people are just going back and forth in the hallway. And I'm just standing. And usually there are people going back and forth and looking in on you to make sure that you're still alive or you're not carrying on in any way with all the tubes going in and out of you. And I'm just standing there in my underwear. And these people are going back and forth and no one notices me. And I think, oh my God. I'm dead. I died. They've taken away the body, but they haven't cleaned up yet. And I'm stuck here. I have to haunt this hospital bed. And finally somebody comes in and says, can I help you? And I says, could I have some new pajamas? And so I've got all this going through in my mind as I'm lying there with thinking that what's going to happen with this sleeping pill. And then suddenly, am I okay for time? Do I have a couple minutes? Okay. I'm just lying there, and this story comes into my head. And I'm thinking, I'm too comfortable to get up and write it down. So I said, I'll never remember it, but I'm going to do my best to recreate it for you. It's a short story, so bear with me. The surprise attack on the 5th Brigade was meticulously planned. Each member of that unit received an engraved invitation to a surprise party for blank. The invitees were instructed, don't tell anyone. It's a surprise party. Just put on your best dress uniform and meet in this large clearing in the forest just outside the lines at such and such a time tomorrow night. And so the next day there was expressed excitement throughout the brigade. And towards evening, people slipped away, skipped dinner, went to their tents, put on their dress uniforms and all their decorations, and headed out on this path through the forest. And when they got to that big clearing, it was like they were in a fairyland. Someone had set up pavilion tents and a long buffet table filled with delicacies they hadn't seen since the beginning of the war. And there were drinks and waiters, and there was a dance floor and a band, and they had a wonderful time. And then the commanders, who had gotten different instructions apparently in their invitations, handed out awards and overdue promotions. And finally it was done, and they headed back to their encampment to discover that the enemy's most elite unit, the 124th Ninja Rangers had quietly surrounded their encampment and quickly silenced anyone who remained, and had carried off all of their tents, their baggage, their personal belongings, their letters, their shaving kits, their weapons, their swords, their horses, their baggage, their draft animals, their camp followers, their doxies, their boy toys, the sutlers and their wagons full of supplies. They had taken everything. And the 5th Brigade came back to their encampment to discover just a large empty field. And that's the surprise party.